All right. Hello, everybody. We've got a very special guest today, Tim Starr. He's a long-term libertarian thinker who's actually considered deeply how economics interplays with national security and military security, kind of an argument that we've gotten away from with appealing to the right, who are concerned with security as is correct, but often kind of get their concerns dismissed by a blithe "bring all the troops home" when we can really be explaining how deregulation, for example, can make us technologically uh, impenetrable and indomitable. So, Tim, why don't you give us a little bit more about your background and also you've been researching Alexander Hamilton, Milton Friedman kind of debate for a while before it even kicked off. So that'll be fun to get into as well this episode. All right, yeah, give us some of your background, Tim.
Sure thing, my pleasure. Well, let's see. I discovered libertarianism in the late 80s, early 90s, and I've basically been some version of that ever since. I worked for the Libertarian Party presidential campaign in 1992 as a campus coordinator. Then I went on to work for an international libertarian nonprofit that is now called Liberty International for much of the 90s. Then I discovered the truth of the joke that the way to become a libertarian millionaire is to start with 2 million. So I decided I had to go into industry to try and make some money. So I've worked for high-tech startups for more than the past 20 years, since the late 90s. And over the course of that time, I still maintained my interest in libertarian thinking. And I guess I'm a bit unusual in that I really got interested in national defense and military history. I was originally starting with the claim that guerrilla warfare was the most libertarian type of defense policy. And I still think there's some truth to that, but I don't think that's the be
Maybe
all.
guerrilla rockets now.
Yes, yeah.
Although Iran tried that, it didn't work out that great.
That's the thing. There's tactical changes. There's other factors that can vary a lot. So I don't think it's the be all and end all. I think there's a lot more to it. And, I've been reading up on that and, of course, following current events as much as I can, such as, the war in Ukraine, the war in the Middle East. I just realized that I have not seen anyone put together my sort of take on the grand strategy that Russia has had since the fall of the Soviet Union. So I just started writing a piece on that.
Oh, very cool. That'll be fun to get into. And what would Alexander Hamilton have thought of guerrilla national defense versus maybe a more professional standing army? Is that the debate we're talking about here, or is that
partly, yes. That is relevant. So Hamilton was definitely an advocate of having a standing army. He had served in the regular army, Continental Forces during the Revolutionary War. He was very heavily involved in the founding of the U.S. Army after the Revolution, big unconventional forces. But I think he would have agreed that the irregular forces, as they were called back then, or the militia, definitely played a big role. And I would argue one that was really indispensable in winning the Revolutionary War, although again, not the be all and end all. It was a, sort of a full spectrum effort, involving militia forces, regular forces, land forces, sea forces, foreign aid. There was a joke going on around a while back where people were describing, Ukraine as nothing but a mere proxy of Russia, and people were joking that you could say that the United States and the Revolutionary War was just a proxy of France. And I don't think either of those is entirely true, but there definitely is something to that.
I use that example to soothe Iranian diaspora people who are very upset about Iran, because I'm like, um, well, this is just how it is. It's like the French Revolution, right? It didn't cost them a huge percent of their GDP. Like if you were around the time of the French Revolution, you could have been like, hey, why are you guys rioting over this? The economic things they've done have caused way more trouble. That's why you can't afford bread. This is barely any, it's not even a large part of the budget. So why are you revolting over this? But people get really mad about sending money overseas. I guess that counts more than the money wasted in other ways, psychologically. So it's still
Yeah, and
like going to be a problem.
Yes, and I'm actually friends with Jeff Hummel, who's
Mm-hmm.
an economic historian. He wrote the book Emancipating Slaves, Enslaving Free Men about the Civil War, and he's a big expert in early American history. And we've talked about, French financials and how they were affected by French sponsorship of the American Revolution. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if he'd exactly agree with me on this, but from my discussions with him and my research, it's pretty clear that the French government's spending was a mess no matter what.
Right.
So if they
It was
hadn't,
ironically the most efficient percent of their entire budget was the little bit they allocated to making England lose the colonies in America.
I
It
think
was
that's
literally the
certainly,
most efficient government spending they had.
yeah, I think that's a very good argument that you could make. Absolutely. And if they
Which
weren't going to
ties
blow
in
the
kind of
money on that,
comedically to the Israel argument, right? About like their intelligence and then the technology benefits versus the trade-off, right? With Netanyahu wanting to get rid of funding and Trump saying, no, I want these conditions. I still want these good deals. So trying to
yeah,
work into another deal where we still
yeah,
get the intelligence.
absolutely. I think one estimate I saw that tried to quantify it said that exchange for like $3 billion a year in loan guarantees, we get over $40 billion a year in return from Israel.
Right. And that might be $40 billion that people think we shouldn't be spending in the first place. But that's also the reality of it. Like if we didn't have Israel's local intel network, we would start building an intel network. We're not like,
Precisely.
we're not
Yes.
a Jeffersonian government, or he
Yeah.
might do that too. Who knows?
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly right. And yeah, I mean, so I think Jefferson was certainly the low point of the American effort to have what we would now call a defense establishment. But even he had to change his ways. He had to change his mind. I mean, he spent the entire period when he was either out of office or, I think Secretary of State under Washington arguing against the Navy. And then as soon as he becomes president, he sends the Navy after the Barbary pirates.
Right.
So, and then the Jeffersonians were still in power in the War of 1812. In the War of 1812, there was basically a land campaign that was a disaster where we tried to conquer Canada. The only successful part of that is our defense of New Orleans. And then the naval campaigns, we actually won some battles against the British. So again, we were
How did we win battles against the British in the naval campaigns? Because I know the USS Liberty or the USS Constitution, not the Liberty, right? The Constitution. That was our flagship at the time, right? And I think it was built around the Revolution. And it was smaller, but it had a lot of advantages. It was really fast, had a strong hull, and it was basically the flagship for the Barbary Wars, and I guess probably this as well, right?
Yeah, so we built about 6 of these ships like the Constitution. They were heavy frigates, which was a design choice that was made to sort of split the difference between, small ships and heavy warships, but it ended up being a very good choice. We had very good oak for building the hulls, which was the reason it was called, the Constitution was called Old Ironsides, was that it was highly resistant to cannonball fire. A lot of cannonballs would just bounce off the hull.
Because we had older oaks, older trees.
Yes, I think so. Yeah, harder wood, exactly, from the Northeast.
That's funny because at my parents' house, there was a piece of lumber from the construction of the USS Constitution, a plank that was in the water where it was built for over 100 years, and it kind of mineralized And then we got a section of it to make a bench. We have a bench made out of that plank, and it is so heavy. It is like the heaviest piece of wood of all time. I don't know how much of that is because of the mineralization, but I feel like I can get a hint of, how hard it was regardless.
Yeah, and there's definitely still a lot of hardwood up there. I recently learned that in the part of upstate New York that my family is from, that is where the last remaining factory is for making bowling pins in the United States, because the hardwood for it is plentiful there. So they harvest the wood.
It's like curling. You need a specific kind of stone, right? Otherwise,
yes,
the competition gets off.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yes. Yeah. For bowling pins, you need really hard wood because it has to withstand being hit by bowling balls all the time, and that's what they use. That's where they do it. So yeah, we had a really big shipbuilding industry back then.
Mm.
So that was I forgot even where how I got to this point, where I was going with
We were
it.
talking about Jefferson, whether he was for a standing army and how he wanted the Navy as soon as he got in.
Yeah, right, exactly. Well, the other thing here is that Jefferson had a nutty idea for coastal defense. He wanted to have these, these little gunships that I think would have one swivel-mounted gun on them, and he thought somehow that would be enough to defend the coastline, and it just wasn't. The ships weren't up to heavy seas. They didn't have enough firepower. So he was a great man in a lot of ways. I think the Declaration of Independence is the greatest piece of political literature ever written, but he also had some rather nutty ideas about how to put those things into practice.
Yeah, as well as around school, he had some kind of not great ideas. Public school systems, I think.
That could be. I don't remember that one specifically, but he was also, I think, far too sympathetic to France right after the revolution. And he ended up having to resign as Secretary of State because of that. The French ambassador Genet, after the revolution, was over here essentially trying to foment a coup against Washington to get us to enter into the war against Britain on France's side. And, Jefferson was too sympathetic to that. I think, as I understand it, Genet's intention was to replace Washington with Jefferson.
Right. Oh, right. So then you have the French scheming, and then Jefferson scheming with the French, and then he gets into trouble because he's not America first. He's too much of a Francophile.
At that point in time, yes, exactly. And then after he becomes president, he sort of flip-flops that and says, hey, I think being America first, last, and only is the best idea after all. And even then, he had to move away from that some.
It's funny how that can happen. So no one would have trusted him in the campaign, but he flipped in office on a lot of those issues. It seems like in both directions.
Yeah, he did, and I think there's something to be said for having to change course tactically as conditions change.
It's good to put yourself into those situations visually, to like visualize the responsibility before you get there, because there's a classic dynamic when you're weighed with like the weight of the actual decision, then you have to look at it again. And if you're looking at things you weren't open enough to look at in the past, then you're going to have to adapt to it then, which is much more difficult. So and I feel like this is an issue with libertarians where they don't really consider the weight of governing responsibility. They don't consider, okay, well, now you have to make a decision, and it's really one train car and one track, and there's bodies the whole way, and you can just go like faster or slower until you change the nature of the systems.
Yeah, and the proverbial trolley problem often happens. You have to decide, do we take this branch or that branch, and which one will do the most good and do the most harm. I think it's very easy for libertarians to fall into the trap of being pure ideologues, and the like pure ideologue version of libertarians hasn't had a lot of command responsibility or strategic responsibility over the centuries. And, you just don't develop the capacity for that kind of decision making. I was just reading something on X about how in Virginia, because of the way the society was structured, the Virginian ruling class developed what was called the habit of command. And it's basically because, among other things, they had to command their plantations full of slaves. And as much as slavery obviously was a bad thing, you still have to run your plantation. You have to make a living. You have to support your family. Hopefully, you have to take care of your workforce. So they did develop those habits anyway. And I think that's part of why, a lot of our early presidents were from Virginia. It was called the Virginia Dynasty.
Oh, right. Well, the Cavalier culture, right? Because they came from landed nobility in England. So they were, and so they served often as the leadership class for Appalachia, which is kind of a classic fit, right? It's like Normans and Britons. Like,
yes, very much so. Absolutely. And I think that, each of those classes of society have their own advantages and drawbacks.
It's a symbiotic relationship.
Yes. And pretending that we can have one without the other, I think, is misleading.
That's another really interesting dynamic, because part of the reason, like with this whole Milton Friedman Hamilton debate, I'm not like too triggered, because libertarians were a little bit silly on tariffs in terms of not recognizing it was a tax that would just replace another tax, and taxation levels are defined by spending, or that we could actually use negotiating power to get foreign tariffs down on us. We kind of didn't engage with the tool or the topic, but still in this debate, like Alexander Hamilton is perceived as the central planner and Milton Friedman is like the liberty guy. But if you actually took their policies, Alexander Hamilton would be way more libertarian than Milton Friedman, because he would want like a 3% taxes. He would want way less regulations. Milton Friedman didn't kind of get to the bottom of those core issues. And also Milton Friedman wasn't really differentiated than Alexander Hamilton on the central bank. I mean, there's nuances to all the policy, but he wasn't.
Yes.
And there's a difference between not starting one and getting rid of one, but yeah.
Yes. Well, I would certainly agree with that. And, at the general level, and then I'll go specific after that, I think one of the biggest mistakes that libertarians want to make is to analyze everything purely in economic terms. And often in purely economic terms, they're right. But for instance, with tariffs, I was reading a history of tariffs by one of the leading experts on it, whose name is escaping me right now. And he, I was watching a talk by him, and he said, well, of course, even Adam Smith said there could be exceptions to free trade for, national defense purposes. And then he immediately moved on without even elaborating on that whatsoever. So to me, that sort of attitude comes off a lot as a sort of, ad hoc qualification that is put out there, but never really developed or emphasized at all. And I think there has to be more to it than that, so, and that typically has been the case with a lot of the tariffs that we have had in the United States historically. Not all of them, of course, but a lot of them have been there for the purposes of developing, strategically important industries or protecting them. Like I know, for instance, I think Intel's had a contract with the U.S. government to maintain the chipset that was built in the Reagan era to control our, naval gunnery and targeting systems. So that's obviously an obsolete chipset. There's no way we would, produce that and deploy that now if we had to start from scratch. But we can't start from scratch all at once. And we need to have a domestic industry that can support that. Right.
Which, like the semiconductors, right? I mean, we can complain about how far we have to go, but to take stock of some of the victories, this national security argument has been used to push huge deregulation, which is now enabling us to produce our own semiconductor chips. which is pretty hilarious, right? Because no one would have guessed for all those decades that we didn't have a chip industry, that it was just because we decided we didn't want to change the law that would make it possible. Everyone assumed it's because like Asians work too hard, Asians get paid less, even though, as I've said, I'll say it again, you know, manufacturing labor costs as a percent of manufacturing revenue is comparable in developing and developed countries. And so no one, everybody, and that makes you more scared, right? Because you think, oh, there's no solution. I don't want to be a bug man. I don't want to do more math. It's like, no, you don't need any of that. You just need to make it legal to build. And
yeah, and I was reminded of that
wasting time in math class.
Yeah, it's a fantastic point. And I was reminded of an analogy that I've used to explain it in the past. I was reading something by Mark Andreessen on X about, you know, how California essentially made semiconductor manufacturing illegal with the sort of, you know, death of 1,000 cuts regulatory approach. And, you know, it reminded me, the analogy I've used to explain this is the plot of one of the worst James Bond movies ever made, A View to a Kill, starring Roger Moore, where the bad guys' evil plan is to set off this giant underground explosion to trigger an earthquake along the San Andreas Fault and destroy all the semiconductor factories in Santa Clara. And, you know, my thought here is that basically we did that to ourselves without the explosion.
That's hilarious. Because we knew how serious it is. That's a big deal to lose your entire semiconductor manufacturing industry. When it's kind of a key component of anything.
And we did it with crazy laws like the Superfund law, which was an environmental toxic cleanup law that said that you know, anytime you found a certain level of, you know, toxic chemical pollution on a piece of land, then the current owner of the land was fully liable for all the cost of cleanup of it, which was mandatory, regardless of whether or not the current owner was the one that actually did the pollution. And the cleanup had to be done to the level where that land would be considered safe for residential use. So, you know, this is just
like you want to make the, you know, 500-yard radius around a factory residential. Like, just we have enough 500-yard radiuses in America that we can use one to make semiconductors.
Yeah, and this basically is why there's this virtually no semiconductor manufacturing, or at least until recently, there was hardly any left in California, and that was the epicenter. That's why Silicon Valley is called Silicon Valley still to this day. But we outsourced all of that, and we didn't have to. And the new factories
that, like, instead of creating an earthquake, you can just fund an NGO and have an even much larger impact. Because if it was just the earthquake, you know, they would have started rebuilding right after, and we would have had a semiconductor industry today, assuming the James Bond movie was in the 70s or something.
80s, but yeah, 80s. Yeah, absolutely, we would have. And yes, if you can demonize something ideologically like that, and I don't think that was necessarily done specifically in this case, but there have been other cases where, you know, there is foreign funding for NGOs to demonize industry here in America, and it has exactly that effect. It's basically, you know, subsidizing the outsourcing of that industry to other countries. So they get a cut, they make a profit off of it.
Yeah. And then, well, you have these international NGOs who literally write the regulations that form the basis of laws all across the country and states down to the municipal level. And people often talk about with regulatory zones, right? There's an incentive. If Europe makes a regulation, there's an incentive for us to adopt that regulation so that we can sell into their market and our market without having two different types of manufacturing, right?
Yes, right, exactly. And California is actually doing the same sort of thing within the United States by setting state level regulations for, like, you know, car emissions and stuff. And so the automakers basically decide, well, if we want to sell cars in California, then we have to make them to California standards. And if we're going to do that, then we might as well have the same standard for the whole United States.
Yes, it creates this pull and this logic to standardize because of this, like, small gain in efficiency. But if you actually had someone go in completely the opposite direction and totally deregulate, then the total cost savings would be higher than the cost savings of the gains in efficiency from acclimating to this standard market. So there's
Yes.
there's an incentive both ways, and
Yes.
the incentive the other way is actually stronger if states were able to get control of their legal apparatus, or the federal government does like broad deregulation like on AI. And there's a lot of pressure on Trump right now to regulate AI, because at
Yes.
first with their regime, right, Mark Andreessen was or not Mark Andreessen, David Sachs, like no regulation, and we're not even letting the states regulate. And now they're under this huge pressure, so they're like, we're creating a regulatory framework, but like Trump is saying, as little as possible regulation on AI, as little as possible. And then there's this debate over nationalization. And how does that do you think, tie into this lobbying effort for regulation as like
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the big elephant in the room is China, because China is going to do what they want no matter what. They're sort of like the Cartman of the international political system, right? China will, straight up say to, anyone saying, hey, we have these regulations. We're like, no, we're not going to do it. Move on.
Right. Iran is their butters. Used and beat up.
That's a good way to put it. Yes, exactly. They certainly are very tight with each other. Yeah. So, I mean, I do think there is a bit of a risk with AI in the cybersecurity world, but that's mainly because we have decades of absolute crap cybersecurity software that's been, shipped and in production. One of my first high-tech startup was essentially an encryption software company back in the late 90s. And, there's all kinds of stuff that we were advocating that people should do back then that have only recently started getting done, like biometric ID for authentication. We had that technology back then. One of my coworkers had a thumbprint reader to log into his computer. It existed. Everybody could have been using it back then. It could have been produced at scale quite cheaply. It just wasn't, because nobody wanted to bother. So I think one of the paradoxes we have right now is that every time they come out with a new an improved version of some AI, whichever it is, people will say, oh my God, we can use it to find all of these security vulnerabilities. And then everyone's like, oh my God, we can't let our enemies have that. And so then they want to restrict access to it to only people that they think they can trust.
Oh, because someone could literally get a Claude account online in Indonesia and hack into our military just with like an online AI.
Into something, yes, it could be.
Yeah, into whatever.
Yeah, I don't know what, but yeah, military, banking, a lot of these old legacy systems, assuming they're not air gapped or secure enough in some other way.
Or corporate espionage, even, right?
Yes, corporate espionage, right? Exactly.
And not even from states, but from people. So basically, AI is just putting this super powerful tool that gives like individuals the capacity to cut through firewalls or do whatever, or build whatever.
Yeah, I'm not expert enough to talk about all the attack vectors, but I know they're out there because we've seen them, for decades.
So how does China deal with this? Aren't they concerned about that? Like a revolution in China if their citizens have this AI capability to?
I think they could be, but their communications network is a lot more locked down than ours. So they probably think they have a higher level of control over it than we do. But even with proposals like saying okay, we're only
could the AI disrupt the Great Firewall, like the Chinese actual firewall, right? Like that's
I'd actually think if we were going to be a real like free speech nation, we would make that a national goal.
Break down China's firewall.
We should have we could have an offensive cyber
memes through the gates
program to take down the Great Firewall.
I mean, we already dropped leaflets in North Korea, right?
Yeah, right, exactly. So to me, it's just a high-tech version of that, right? And we could be doing the same thing to Iran right now. so they can't shut down the internet on their own under their own power anymore.
That's another insane aspect of modern warfare. And that one of our advantages in Iran, we talk about the planes and the air superiority, but like we can see everything down to great detail. I mean,
Yes.
it's like when you unlock spy power in Age of Empires at the end of the game, like just to troll on somebody.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you deal with that kind of asymmetric advantage?
Yeah, but and it is definitely a huge advantage that we've had, and we've actually had it for a long time. I used to have debates with people in the '90s again about guerrilla warfare, and he would say, "Well, we just look at you with our satellites and read your license plates and figure out who you were." And I was like, "Wait, they can read license plates with satellites?" And he was like,
in
"Yeah,
the '90s,
yeah."
right.
And that's one of the points that I make again about the symbiotic relationship we were talking about between economics and military defense. A lot of that technology that got commercialized in the '90s and after was incubated in the military defense complex. That's where GPS came from. Everyone talks about how that's where ARPANET, which became the internet, came out of. And so thinking that we can somehow magically have all of these nice things without ever having a military industrial complex. I don't think the military industrial complex gives us everything, but it gives us some things that I think we probably would not have had as soon.
So you're talking about the innovation actually coming out of the military, because this is this gets into kind of a chicken and the egg situation, right?
Yes.
Because the military is certainly taking the technologies and making things that we wouldn't otherwise make.
Right.
But at the same time, like you can't have the level of firearms industry as Vienna in the 1400s did without also the originally having the capacity to make a grand piano. Because if you can make a grand piano, you have the metalworking technology to be also the best at making guns. So
yes,
it's
right,
like which comes first and they feed off of each other. Ultimately, you need like that economic generation. But
yes,
you can,
and for instance, cannon technology, the metallurgy for making cannons came out of what was being done for church bells.
Really fascinating.
Yes. Yeah. And so if you look at if you look at the early shapes of what we came to call cannons, they were called bombards. They actually look a lot like church bells. You just sit them on the ground and point the empty part up, and you put a charge in it, and
Well, like literally a Fisher Price kids cartoon cannon that kind of expands at the end, right? Like a kind of like one of those pirate muskets that fan out at the end.
Yeah, blunderbuss, right? Exactly. Blunderbuss. Yes. Yeah. So I think there's interplay back and forth between the commercial sector and the military sector that is unavoidable. And I would certainly not say that on the whole military spending is economically efficient, but it's often necessary for the security that you need in order to have an economy. And then some of that technology that gets developed from that military spending does have commercial applications, which can be very beneficial.
Well, how a good way to visualize it is the way things work is when the technological ecosystem gets to a certain threshold for it to be possible for something else to be invented, then about 3 people think of it at the same time. So what the military does is by concentrating extra capital and focusing it on certain areas is they get like 10 years ahead of where that natural kind of market setup would be.
Right.
So they're kind of like skimming the cream off of the top a little earlier, and then
that's kind of my concept of it. Eric Raymond, who I met years ago, has this essay about the cathedral and the bazaar, where he's arguing for open source software as opposed to closed source. And so his analogy is the bazaar is the open source, and closed source is a cathedral. But I like this analogy in a way to talk about the relationship between the like government spending versus the free market. So, the free market is very good at innovation, it's very good at experimentation. It's this widely distributed, decentralized, discovery system. But what the government can do, I think in some cases better, is basically, cream off the top, like you were saying, and say, okay, this is what we really need right now, and we need a lot of it. So we're going to take this and we're going to, produce it at scale. That's what the United States did with our war production drive in World War II, starting in 1940. And we converted civilian industry, the automotive industry, a whole bunch of others, and said, okay, you guys are great at producing stuff for the mass market. Now we need, a whole bunch of tanks and fighter jets and bombers and artillery and, all this stuff. And it was converted over. There was almost
China focuses so much on convertibility, right?
Yes, exactly right.
Ship production industry.
Yes, precisely. It's exactly what China has figured out and has been doing. Yeah.
And it's interesting too, because what part of what the government's doing there is they're taking like outsized chunks of capital that maybe wouldn't likely to be risked. But two counterexamples of that are what Musk is doing, and then the first intercontinental cables that were laid. Because you think, well, that must have been a government project, right? But it was in the 1800s where the government only had 3% of the money, and there was a rich guy who spent like his whole fortune making this gamble, and they made a like ridiculously large cable. This is like a science fiction project back then. It's not theoretically possible. They make it snaps in the middle of the ocean, which is just insane. 10 years later, they do it again, and it works. And that's the first intercontinental cable, and that's just totally private actors. And it's kind of like what Musk is doing with space. That's a huge investment, right? That's also groundbreaking new technologies, and it's opening up like an entirely new landscape of market potential, like a cable or like the internet would, or like any of these other big focused investment technologies into something that doesn't exist yet.
Yeah, I agree. And I used to not have so much respect for Musk because I was very skeptical of electric vehicles. But I realized later that he wasn't just building compliance cars. He was trying to figure out, not just cars, of course, but sort of a general attack on the cost structures of a lot of these legacy industries that we've had in space, in automotives, in tunneling. And what I've been very impressed with about him is he tries to figure out, why are these things so costly, and how can we make them less so?
Well, that's a great frame. Imagine if you could apply that to other areas of the economy, which is why it's so frustrating, right? You take a medical bill and then you analyze the cost of the goods that go into it, like the expected competitive margin that someone would enter this market at. And just by getting rid of basic legal barriers, you would reduce cost by 10 times. It's completely...
Yes. A lot of our industries are so incredibly regulated or, restricted.
It's like, what would it take to give you the full roundup of medical tests that, a multimillionaire gets at the Mayo Clinic? How much would it actually cost for the materials, for the machines to do that? And it would be like $100.
Yeah. And
I've not allowed to build those machines and operate them outside of the licensing monopoly.
Right. And I've had friends who've done, a version of that. Like I had colleagues from India, when they'd go back home once a year, they'd just pay out of pocket to have all of their medical tests done in one day. And it would cost them, a fraction of what it would cost here. Years ago, I had a friend who had to have a whole bunch of dental work done. So he didn't have insurance. So he figured out it was actually cheaper for him to fly to the Philippines and have it done in Subic Bay after the base was closed there, because the ecosystem of businesses was still there and it was up to U.S. standards. And it would be cheaper for him to do it that way, including the cost of his airfare and his stay there and his entertainment. So,
and it's like, why is it cheaper? No, it's not just because like Asian people will do it for cheaper. It's because they're allowed to without all these hoops.
That's a big part of it. Absolutely, certainly, yes. And
the labor is driven up by the licensing monopolies, and that's a factor. But overall,
yeah, exactly right. And another big factor here that I think doesn't get anywhere near as much attention as it needs to is the cumulative effect of inflation that we've had in the United States since the early 70s. I call it a slow motion hyperinflation. If I read a book, there's a very good book out there called The Rise and Fall of American Growth. And the paradox that he's trying to explain is that we had about a century from roughly 1870 to 1970 in America of incredible total factor productivity growth. And then it stopped in 1970. Why? And he goes through the whole book, never answering that question, really, to my satisfaction. He has a bunch of things like, we already did all the, low-hanging fruit, and there isn't anything left. And I'm going, you got to be kidding me, dude.
That's such a funny view.
Yeah. I mean, how could there not be, we had total factor productivity growth during the height or the depth of the Great Depression. Right. Because industry said, oh, my God, we've got to, figure out how to make a profit because we're not. So they did all this R&D and they came up with all these things. And then suddenly in 1970, that all just stopped.
Right.
No way. I think what happened instead is there was this massive shift towards, a race to the bottom in terms of costs. Labor costs have always been one of the biggest costs of production in the U.S. because, basically everybody that, works here had to come here in the first place. And then we never had that much, population density compared to a lot of other parts of the world. But that wasn't the only one, of course. Just the costs of everything went up because of inflation, and it just became cheaper to do stuff outside the United States if you could.
And how did inflation specifically relate to an incentive for offshoring?
Well, you can, if for instance, labor in China is 1/10 the cost of labor here in the United States, then, like Apple was a big one that did this. I just finished reading the book Apple in China, which talks a lot about this. So you can make a lot more ROI if you cut your labor costs by a factor of 10. If the regulatory environment is more permissive over there, then again, that's a major cost advantage. If you can basically have governments that will tell you, and we see this now with, like corporate relocations within the United States, they'll get sweetheart deals if they go into a certain state or a certain town, right? We're going to open a factory. What can you give us in the way of tax breaks and, subsidies for the first, 10, 20 years of our operation.
Yeah, and all those Asian cities would give people exactly what they needed for the decision to relocate to be good.
Yeah. I mean, Shenzhen is basically an economic free zone, right?
Yeah.
So they'll say, hey, come do whatever you want. We'll build the roads. We'll, give you workers. We won't tax you for a long time, whatever the deal is. That's very attractive.
English university set up for your executives, expats. Well, and this is why I was like asking about inflation, because I think inflation, taxes, other things, they play a role, but the regulatory gap plays the biggest role, because that instead of, taxes will take 50% versus 25% or something, but regulations will double, triple, quadruple your cost, do the same thing for your timeline, which means years of market share. And then labor as a percent of manufacturing revenue is actually fairly comparable in Asia and the US. So it depends on the industry and the company and the exact nature, but there's a range, but it averages out around 8% in China versus 11% is the labor cost as a percent of manufacturing. So as a percent of your manufacturing revenue, it's only 3% difference, and the trans-Pacific shipping alone is 10%, which is triple that labor.
Right. So I think that's true now. I don't think it was true initially in the early 70s, and I think that's when the big shift happened, because inflation.
I know it's been true at least since 2011, but I don't know the data before that.
Yeah, well, so inflation was really high in the 70s. It was double digit here in the United States. And this created what they called a ratchet effect with union labor bargaining. The other thing that was going on was you had tax bracket creep, because the taxation was done on the nominal income. It was not inflation adjusted at the time. So when inflation went up, wages lagged. And then you had very aggressive union bargaining for pay raises that, this is when the Rust Belt happened, starting in the mid 60s, which is when inflation really started to take off, because that's when government spending really started to take off on the combination of the Vietnam War and the Great Society.
So this is a really great example with the unions, right? And the labor costs going up, changing the equation, creating a spiral where the unions ask for better benefits. And we focus on that. But the factor that would have actually changed the equation, that would have not made that inflation margin kill the whole industry, is if they didn't regulate the industry so heavily in the first place to make it tight on labor. Because we were also losing, like Detroit and Michigan were losing production not just to other countries, but to other states in the U.S. And even
and that happened first, right? Exactly, because again, the Detroit unions were so aggressive that there was a big incentive for the big three.
Oh, this is it. So the way that the unions operate, right? It's not just labor; it's process, right? It's how things are made. So this is how you can then you relate it to the Dutch shipbuilding, right? Because instead of having one guy, one guild dedicated to putting the tar on, one guild would do the wood work, one guild would do the pulleys, right? Instead, they turn it into an assembly line and change the process. That changed the jobs. So it wasn't just like the wages, it's that they didn't want to change what each person was responsible for, how the thing is made. And that's what kills an industry, because you need the disruption of the innovation to happen over and over and over again.
Yeah, and that's exactly what happened. And there's a very good example of this. I read a history of the U.S. auto industry, and it pointed out that Saturn was an attempt by GM to defy this trend. They basically came up with an entire new line of cars, new factories, new contracts, and they had a lot fewer job categories for the workforce. I can't remember the exact numbers, but it was something like the difference between, I guess 400 in the standard GM contract to maybe less than 100 in the Saturn contract. And everybody liked it. The workers liked it. The consumers liked it. It was profitable. The only people that didn't like it were the union bosses, because it undercut their bargaining power for the rest of their membership.
And so Saturn made a different way of manufacturing, a different way of operating.
Yes.
And did they get shut down legally?
No, the unions killed it.
And right. And that's through, I mean, they had legal power to do that, right?
They did, absolutely, right. Yes, exactly. So in a way, you could say like the power they had under what the National Labor Relations Act enabled them to do.
It's so insane. It's so insane. Yeah. This is equivalent to the James Bond movie plot with taking out the semiconductor chips, right? Yeah. This is why cars haven't fundamentally changed. Like the engine design hasn't changed besides Tesla. Yeah. It's just gotten marginally more efficient. And then the way you produce it. So what happens is then if you refuse to adapt to the way that if you refuse to let human workers do things differently, then eventually you just replace all human workers with automation, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that's something
that allowed to do it in a different way. You can't combine human and tool.
Yeah.
It's just tool is better than government
replacing automation, right? Exactly. And Saturn actually was a lot more automated than the other GM factories at the time. But again, they were doing stuff that the workers didn't have to do, so the workers were freed up to do the things that they could do better. And
automation integrated with workers rather than just automation replacing workers.
Precisely,
that's what you're forcing people to do.
Exactly, it was enhancement or augmentation rather than just straight substitution. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that's what Japan did before us. South Korea copied Japan. So they didn't do it as okay, we don't want to have human workers anymore. They were like, no, we want to be more efficient and have higher quality. And this is also why to this day American cars have a serious quality lag behind a lot of the Japanese cars and the South Korean cars, because they have to cut costs.
Right, and we made it. We cost humans a ton of jobs by trying to hold on to jobs in the old way of doing things. We lost them either to overseas or to more fully automated systems than we would have otherwise.
Yeah, exactly. And there's no reason why we had to do that. And there's been, I would argue one of the other, sort of like most noticeable long-term consequences of this whole process is I think there's been a massive decline in product quality overall. People used to buy appliances for life. I've had to buy multiple microwaves in the past 10 years.
Yeah. There's no room for, because at some point there's an arbitrage opportunity there, right? There's a company that could make things that last longer that people would pay for.
Yeah.
But because they're kept out of the industry, it's kind of like in the same way a cartel can control prices better than a competitive industry, right?
Yeah.
They can do that same thing with not just the prices, but the nature of how they're building the product entirely in the first place.
Yeah. And if you look at a lot of, the things that the products that people think of as, classics, like classic cars is a real good example. Almost all of the cars that people think of as classic cars were made before this, massive wave of inflation really began. They're almost all, pre-1970 or pre-1980 at the latest.
Right. Yeah, back when we still had a competitive dynamic industry. The things that we could have. I mean, imagine if there were 20, 30 car companies, how cool that would be.
Yeah, and so that's again another thing where I actually developed some strange newfound respect for Musk with Tesla. I'm still not a fan of electric vehicles on the whole, but he made them profitable, and he seems to have a real commitment to quality and cost control. And he's really the only one, as far as I can tell. All the other people were doing it, essentially as regulatory compliance mandate. And he really, he did take advantage of that, but
that's how he got through, right? He got through in a loophole by appealing to the leftist environmentalism that let him through the regulatory blockade that had prevented any other type of car. The miracle of Elon Musk isn't that he built an electric car. We could build an electric car forever. It's that he legally was able to build an electric car.
Yeah, exactly. Another good example of this here is small trucks, small pickups, right? I remember when in the 80s, Toyota was shipping enormous numbers of small two-seater pickups here, and they were selling like hotcakes everywhere. I grew up in Berkeley, and they were all over Berkeley, California. And I guarantee you, Berkeley, California has no pickups today. Okay.
Did you see they're bringing back mini pickups?
Yes.
Trump deregulated that, so you can make the mini ones now.
Precisely, exactly. There was a regulatory change, but even before that, there was already an existing trend towards that, but they had to do it with electric vehicles because the regulations that were driving the move to bigger and bigger trucks. I mean, your standard Ford F-150 pickup now is the size of a Sherman tank in World War II. The crew cab 4-seater model. what was driving that were the fuel economy requirements that basically said that it was a function of the wheelbase of the vehicle.
Mm-hmm.
So if you had a small wheelbase, you were required to have really high fuel efficiency, and they just couldn't do that with pickups. And my dog is barking.
Okay. So there's a fuel efficiency
Yeah,
issue.
right, exactly. Right. And but they could do it with electric vehicles. So now Ford started making the Maverick, which is a small electric pickup, and now, of course, like you said, we've had some deregulation thanks to Trump, and they're going to be able to start making the gas-powered small trucks again, which they have all over the world elsewhere. I know they have them in, Thailand, wherever else.
Well, it's so sad too, because did you see that statistic JD Vance shared years ago about how the regulations for car seats, the requirement for car seats up until like 7 years old, meant that to have 3 kids, you needed to get an upgrade to a larger car.
Yes.
And that extra barrier was estimated to have saved like 200 lives and prevented 100,000 births.
Yes. Yeah. We've had all kinds of
illegal to live. And it's like, I remember having this, I would use this as an example to my leftist friends to argue for deregulation, which was like, okay, so you have in Mexico or South Asia, right? You have a family of 5 driving around on a scooter, right?
Yeah.
So now if you make it illegal to manufacture a car without a seatbelt, which requires an additional change in the manufacturing process, that's going to raise the prices. That's going to be an extra percentage of people who now have no car and have their entire family on a scooter because you thought they were too unsafe to drive without seatbelts. And maybe seatbelts a bad example because it's not that expensive and it makes a big impact. Right. But there's other better examples within that.
And why don't we have station wagons anymore? You could fit a whole family in a station wagon quite easily if you didn't have to have everybody in a car seat. But yeah, so that drove,
and everybody had seatbelts before they regulated it, just for the record.
Yeah, like, exactly. Right. Precisely. Yeah. That's a big thing. In order to have a large family, now you have to buy a 3-row SUV. Yeah. And that just puts it beyond the reach of a lot of people.
So, it's like COVID, right? To save one life, we're killing millions of people. We're leaving tens of millions in chronic health issues and obesity and death and just wreaking havoc all across, destroying meaning, suicides, all to save one life. And like,
yeah, it's a classic case of Bastiat's the seen and the not seen. Right.
Yes. Yeah. It's like, what's the point of living if it's not even fun anymore? Which is, you're going to get people to commit cultural suicide. Like, that's not a solution. This hyper safetyism is so insane. And it's part of the reason why, like, Milton Friedman's getting thrown under the bus, because all the neoliberals didn't fight this hard enough. In fact, they often advocated for it, right? So
but they had to work within the system, and there were a lot of assumptions that they felt that they simply could not successfully challenge. So they adapted their proposals to fit in with those, conventional wisdom assumptions.
This is like making fun of the conservative movement over the last 30 years. For like the only win they secured was gun rights, right? They lost on everything else. They got some gun rights since the 90s. It's like, well, maybe they were fated to lose that era. So like getting something was all they could do, right?
They did what they could, and they did a lot. Actually, I give them an enormous amount of credit for that. I mean, I remember, when L. Neil Smith in the 90s was talking at a Libertarian Party convention about trying to convert the entire country to what he then had to call Vermont carry, because Vermont was the only state in the country that had what we now call constitutional carry, meaning you don't need a permit.
Funny. Bernie Sanders.
Yeah, and now there was this weird legacy thing about Vermont from way back when, a court decision in the 20s, I think. And
the Green Mountain Boy spirit.
Yeah, it's still alive there in a lot of ways. And now we have half the country or more has it. So I think that's a big deal, and that
Mm-hmm.
deserves people giving credit for. Oh gosh, there was a point I was going to make about Friedman, and now I got off of it. What was it? Another great example of regulation killing fun, specifically the drinking age.
Oh
So
yeah.
it used to be legal in a lot of states to drink at a bar if you were 18 or over. And then
Mm-hmm.
that law got raised back up to 21. And I had cousins who, were in a bar drinking on, New Year's Eve, and they weren't 21 yet. And it was illegal for them to drink until midnight. And at midnight, they had to stop. But that supported a lot of bars that had live music. And that
Yeah.
whole cultural subculture, nightlife scene is gone now.
I'm actually glad you mentioned that because nobody talks about this. And I have this one kid on Twitter who's under 21 and he's really bothered by it. He's really annoyed and he's always posting, like, can you bring attention to this issue? And I'm like, I'm so sorry, buddy. But like, once you turn 22, nobody cares anymore. Like, once you're 25, they forgot that they ever were not allowed into a bar. And then it's a hard sell for like to encourage teens to drink or something, but obviously it's creating huge social problems, right? I mean, or it would be a way to help mitigate some of these social problems that were created by other things, right? Where people aren't hanging out with each other, they're not getting human contact, they're not, and all the
Yeah.
bars are so expensive because the liquor license, right, prevents you from making just an area where you can drink without losing half your monthly paycheck because alcohol is actually not that expensive.
Yeah, and one aspect of this that is again kind of I think unexpected and weird is one of the reasons why San Francisco became a gay rights mecca is because they had a very open system for liquor licenses, so it's very easy to open a gay bar in San Francisco.
Well,
So
now you see, now I don't know. Now you're hurting our argument. I was thinking more just somewhere you can drink outside of the boomer economy. I guess they would have it would have worked then, right? Because most establishments would have kicked them out or something.
There was a lot more intolerance.
But now all of our regular bars are gay anyways, so it's more about
exactly
lowering costs and
precisely
giving people a place to hang out.
Yeah, there's been a massive cultural shift. But my book club recently read a history of the I guess you'd call it San Francisco since World War II, roughly, sort of a cultural history. And one of the things that really amazed me and struck me is how incredibly socially conservative the San Francisco and its police department used to be. I mean, they used to really go after gay people just for being gay. And
interesting. Like in the 70s?
60s and 70s,
Right. Well, that makes sense.
I mean, Carol Doda sort of was this famous topless dancer in North Beach, and she actually changed the culture a lot because when she started dancing topless in this bar, the cops would arrest her for it. And she basically said, I'm going to keep doing this, so, I don't care. And, she wasn't doing like, sexual acts per se. She just wasn't wearing anything on top. There was a massive cultural change that happened, and there was a big increase in personal freedom since then. That's permeated so much now throughout our culture. It's gone overboard in a lot of ways.
Right.
But we take a lot.
And that's the other problem is right. Like, I mean, the nuance of not arresting someone and throwing them in jail for something versus it actually being a negative cultural trend, and then people, if you argued against it, or if you say it's culturally harmful, then for years everyone assumes that you want to beat people up and arrest them, which isn't even going to solve the underlying. It's like that's like symptom control at this point, right? Because that's not going to solve the underlying issues of cultural degradation and the fact that like monogamy's been destroyed, etc.
Yes, right, exactly. So on the one hand, we have this massive increase in personal freedom, yay. On the other hand, it's sort of become this new type of paradigm of cultural oppression.
Right. And now the bars are gay and expensive. So it's
yes, right, exactly. It reminds me that there was a joke I heard once about there was supposed to be a sign when you were entering West Berlin from East Germany where there was a warning on the communist side. It says, "Warning, and now entering West Berlin, private property rights are mandatory."
gun ownership is mandatory.
Yeah, exactly right. It would be as if the gun rights movement had started requiring everybody to start carrying guns. Yes, exactly.
So switching gears a little bit, what do
Yes.
you, and now that we've covered kind of like a little bit of Alexander Hamilton, a little bit of Milton Friedman, a little bit of the underlying dynamics that people reference relative to those debates, what do you think about JD Vance's comments on it and recent interviews? What do you think about this kind of like talk about nationalizing parts of AI or compassion in economics? Like, how much of it do you think is rhetoric mixed with specific strategic initiatives, as opposed to like Alexander Hamilton is actually very free market because he lived in the 1800s and the government was small, and that's actually a vision that's more libertarian, even if it involves, strategic use of tariffs.
Yeah, right, exactly. Well, so I guess the first thing I would say is that a lot of people today who present themselves as Hamiltonians are, as you say, a lot less free market than Hamilton was.
Mm-hmm.
And I do have this concern. I mean, my sort of overall take on JD Vance is I think that he is very smart and fairly knowledgeable. And I think he advocates for a lot of very real, legitimate concerns that Americans have about, domestic issues. I think where he seems to go off the rails is in his diagnosis of them and the prescriptions that he comes up with them to remedy them. I don't think that we're going to be able to, restore all industry to the United States simply by putting up a big tariff wall.
Right.
I think that's misguided. And I don't even think Hamilton would really go along with that. A big part of the reason why Hamilton gets demonized by libertarians is that he advocated a central bank, and we all hate central banks, right? But the other side of that debate was almost a blanket opposition to banking at all.
Right, because they didn't want to get subsumed by the English bank and the international bank and just become a fish in their stream, subject to their manipulation, kind of like the whole world is with the US dollar, where we can inflate and off-write half that cost on dollar holders.
Yeah, right, exactly. So in a way, what Hamilton was trying to say was, no, we got to have a bank. And, we need to catch up with Britain so we can hold our own economically and militarily, and we can't do that without a bank and
it was a nationalist thing to combat the global central bank, so to speak.
Yes, precisely. Yeah, exactly. Right. And he was saying, there are strategic industries that we need in order to, fund them more, quickly than we think the free market will at this particular point in time. So
right, because which there's a point to that, right? Because it takes some time for things to restructure. You can get huge immediate benefits from deregulation, but like you still need to build it. So like, if you're guiding that and giving it that head start, theoretically, that is the optimal way to do it. The problems come in when it's like, well, is the government going to do it optimally? Are we going to get in a situation where now these companies can't fail because they're part government owned or subsidized or whatever? But if you did it right, you could give a boost as you're deregulating, which because that's what's going to, if you don't have a strong regulatory regime, then you're not going to be able to keep the same companies around even with subsidies.
Yeah, right, exactly.
There will be disruption if it's allowed. And then I know like JD Vance, right? I mean, you got the Peter Thiel Association and Peter Thiel understands very well around deregulation. You have Joe Lonsdale making the case for full privatization of building permits. So I feel like these are kind of like the beliefs of that counter elite that Vance is close to, but maybe some of that is too complicated, and we forget kind of like where the general population is in terms of rhetoric, right, and perception. So maybe that's why he's framing certain things that might, in a way that might autistically trigger me, but actually be a way that speaks more to the concerns of the people based on their general understanding of the situation. Like I would be like, I was like, oh no, it's not free trade that made us lose industry. It's deregulation. And then
regulation and
he'll frame it
inflation.
in the opposite way.
Yeah.
As he's talking about tariffs, which is fair. Like, the 90s tariff policy wasn't good, but we should still mention this other factor in connection to the narrative, the explanatory narrative. But that's probably like one step of abstraction too much for his public narrative.
Yeah, well, okay. So commenting on Vance here, I think you're accurately describing roughly half of his intellectual influences, but I think the other half needs to be brought in, which is the post-liberal people like Sohrab Ahmari, who apparently is writing a biography of him and traveling with him all over the place. Ahmari is very much a post-liberal. I think they call them Catholic integralists. They basically believe that we need to be more of an actual Catholic theocracy. I don't know how far that goes, but
there's so much cringe stuff around that ecosystem.
I know. I'm not religious myself at all, but I do believe there is a real place for religion in Western civilization. I'm just not incredibly, partial to any particular version of that.
You mean like denomination, Christian denomination?
Yeah, exactly. I'm not anti-Catholic more than I am anti-Protestant, more than I am anti-Jewish. The one religion that really does, I think, have some real problems is Islam. But even there, I think there is, a perfectly compatible version of Islam that would be okay in our society. But anytime I hear people talking about, we need to, define ourselves, as a Christian nation or something, in a way that excludes people of other religions, I think that's very troubling. And it bleeds over into economics in a lot of ways, because there is a full-blown sort of, I think it's called distributivism, where you basically say that, and this is very big in traditional Catholic thought, where you basically say you need to, have a certain type of, family structure, nuclear families, lots of kids, and you need to tailor your policies to produce those. And I think there's a lot of room for achieving that with, deregulation and tax cuts and stuff. But my big concern is when it starts going beyond that, where we would start saying, things like, this factory in Ohio is getting shut down because of competition from this other country that's making furniture. So we need a tariff on all furniture from that country. I think that would be very dangerous, but I get the impression, and I haven't met Vance, so I can't specifically say.
If you start reacting to every tariff, every loss of competitive industry with a tariff, then you're going to stack on to the point where, and I mean, I've seen plenty of Asian countries do this, where they basically kill all their domestic industry, but just by continually solving the problem with a tariff. And it's like, I don't know, I don't think that's his actual philosophy. But if he can speak to some of these concerns around like the Catholic, recent progressive Catholic doctrine of distributism, then that's one thing. But I really don't like all this, like the Catholic Church in the 1890s kind of made a a pitch for subsidiarity, which was like the turning point for the Catholic Church shifting to following progressive culture instead of creating or leading culture itself, because subsidiarity could be semantically interpreted towards like global government versus like Thomas Jefferson agrarian economy or whatever. Like you could semantically interpret that to any way, because what subsidiarity means is governance to its appropriate sphere. So from local to high. So depending on what you define as appropriate, like you can make anything with that. And then yeah, they started following this progressive culture and all this like distributivism stuff and digging up old doctrine and reinterpreting it towards being compatible with like a giant progressive state is not really an intellectual trend that I'm that interested in.
Right.
Yeah, or would like to see propagated, because it's also like, it's like when these guys they kind of make this interpretation of like new Christianity that happens to align perfectly with like 1930s German eugenicists or something. And it's like, wait a minute, are you sure that's actually a Christian interpretation, or you're like trying to sell this idea through Christianity? And obviously I don't think JD Vance is doing any of that stuff, but the whole like ecosystem is weird and annoying.
It is troubling to me also. Geopolitically, a lot of these post-liberals were getting funded out of Hungary by Orban, and Orban was the most pro-Russian ruler in NATO.
Sure.
Unless maybe you count Erdogan in Turkey. It might be a toss-up between them. Now Orban's out. They're cutting funding for the Danube Institute and I can't remember the name of it. It's called the Matthew something Collegium, MCC. So those were a lot of JD Vance's buddies that were very tight.
And now look what's happening to Hungary, right? They're getting absorbed into the EU system and scammed by like this neoliberal alternative that like, so if you mess up as like the national conservative and don't fix things, then you just create room for your worst enemies to bring you back in and remind you of like, well, what's like the one area of overlap between Russia and conservatives? It's like, we don't like the EU, we don't like globalist organizations, we don't like global homo or whatever. Not that Russia is a panacea for conservatism with the highest abortion rates in the world and the highest number of prostitute exports in the world.
And I have to mention it because almost no one knows about it. Legal possession of child pornography.
Right, there you go. In Russia too. That's hilarious.
Yes.
Of course.
Yes.
Yeah, and of course they're bringing in like Islam, and Putin talks about how their like socialism is very open, like religiously free, like all religions, Islam and Christianity, because the Russia presides over this multi-ethnic, multi-religious empire, and so they have to make this kind of like appeal, which is just hilarious because it's all the kind of opposite.
Yeah, and I do think there's some genuine appeal in some of the agenda that Orban was espousing, and that not letting your country get flooded by immigrants from a culture that is fundamentally incompatible with yours.
Right. And like, I'm fine with, I love it. Like, yes, family, great. Monogamy, actually good for cultural and good for, that's like a positive Christian principles. And then I forgot exactly what was my train of thought with that setup. I forgot.
Was it triggered by my talking about how, Orban actually said some good things?
Oh, yes. So like, I actually care about those things, right? I want those things to happen. So I want to make sure that the solution to it isn't just like tax benefits for families or something, which has never ever worked in history to reverse a birth rate problem or like the U.S. government did plenty of policies in the 50s and 60s to try and like boost family over and that just resulted in like kind of the government like defining marriage in a way that actually undermined conservatives' causes. Like if you don't fix the meaning crisis, if you don't fix the opportunity crisis, if you don't fix the value crisis, then no amount of like tax policy is going to restore your culture.
Yeah, and affordability.
Again, I'm not saying that that's their plan, but I want to make sure it works.
Right. I think the biggest risk here is that, like you're saying, that there, supposed remedies get implemented that don't really address the root cause of the problem. Yeah. And I just saw a really good chart that talked about this, and it supports amazingly consistently what I've been saying about inflation for a while now. So if you look at the median age in America when people started becoming parents, that was trending down throughout the 50s and 60s until right around the early 1970s. And then it reversed, and it's been trending up ever since. And I would argue this is a clear case of affordability. People can't afford to become young parents anymore. Right. It's been less and less so. And this is an
obvious... This is connected to the safetyism and the licensing thing, right? Deferred adulthood, the signaling system, where you get out at like 22, you have very little responsibility before that. Maybe you end up working in a corporate job where you're also not kind of able to execute on any sort of your own vision. I was speaking with Rudyard about this recently, where like there's no arena anymore where you can like be the best of 150 people by doing things in your own way, in your own vision. The only thing we have like YouTube, which is like mass market competition, in sports, which is like they're like the two hardest competitions ever, with millions and billions of people playing. Yes. But there's no avenue for like to have your own vision on a 150 person scale with your own company, because like 80% of the market is these large corporations where you're a middle manager, and you're really not like able to adopt responsibility and execute your own will, right? You're manager, and within this larger constraint, and so there's no avenue for heroism, right? There's no
right, exactly. So we all have to get it vicariously from watching others. And I think
Braveheart was good, was worth it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm a big fan of a lot of these. I would call that a war movie, right?
I think it has a big cultural impact, movies like that, and there's like an asymmetry which benefits us, whereas like Hollywood gets rid of a bunch of bad ideas. But just the fact that we had Lord of the Rings, Braveheart, The Patriot, it just like a few sneaking through is more powerful than everything else put together. It's like the opposite of a fragile strategy. Like they have a fragile strategy. If they just let it through once, then people know what that is, and they know.
Precisely. Yes, I agree. Certainly. Yeah. So, so I guess getting back to Vance here, my concern again is that, we'll try these sort of, subsidy and tax Band-Aid type of remedies that don't really address the root cause, and may actually make things a lot worse. Like the cost of having a child, I saw estimated as being roughly equivalent to buying a luxury sports car, like $200,000 or $300,000, right?
Right.
Because you have to include the cost of housing and food and education for a long period of time, and how many luxury sports cars can people afford to buy in the course of their lifetime?
Yeah, well, the whole thing about it being more expensive to have a kid in a modern economy, that's actually, quite self-imposed. It doesn't have to be more expensive, but it's like one kid might die somewhere, therefore we have to make it unaffordable to have kids. And again, like Vance gets that. Vance has demonstrated that, right? So I don't want to get too carried away on the rhetoric versus the reality, but I also am invested in like these intellectual battles and this like broad perception of understanding on the right. And I think sometimes you have to differentiate the role of a politician versus the role of someone who's trying to improve the intellectual landscape.
Right.
And sometimes they can overlap, sometimes perfectly, like Malay, but most of the time not. Like Vance has to win America 2026 or 2028. And unfortunately, we haven't done enough as a movement to challenge a lot of the underlying preconceptions that people have from public education and leftist indoctrination.
Yeah,
so,
we need to do a lot more effective thought leadership. Absolutely.
I realized that today when I mentioned Steinway pianos as an analogy for why it's like factually proven that guilds don't help, and like nobody liked it. I'm like, wait a minute, maybe people don't know about Steinway pianos and the German guild restrictions and how they destroyed his pianos when he built it different.
Yeah, and now I think almost all pianos are made in China, right? So
right. There you go.
So the other thing I was going to say is I think you're definitely onto something about opportunities for competency, especially in small groups or at a young age. You were reminding me that my grandfather drove a truck for a living at age 13. And this is because there weren't driver's licensing laws back then in upstate New York where we lived.
My dad did too, with a wooden block tied on his foot so that he could reach the gas pedal.
Yeah, exactly. There you go. There's workarounds. There's ways.
And his uncle was like, there's a revolver in the dash on the dash. Like, use it in these scenarios.
Yeah. And then, we used to have a lot more opportunities, and like, gosh, there's an old classic tearjerker movie called Where the Red Fern Grows, which is about a little boy who desperately wants a couple of hunting dogs. And so, what does he do? He gets a job and he makes money and he works and he saves up to buy these hunting dogs.
Exactly.
It's very hard for kids to do that these days.
It would have been illegal on so many dimensions. Like, you can't you can't break any eggs. Like, if anything is going to be not perfect, you can't do it. You can't learn. You can't forge your own path. You can't have an idea and manifest it through your own vision.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's just absolutely soul destroying, right? For people who are born with an innate creativity that gets beaten out of you by the time you're done with high school.
Yeah,
and your brain is entirely retrained. That's a huge cost. Like that is 50% of the entire. That is like 75% GDP potential is destroyed through. And I don't mean GDP just in like a generic sense. I mean, like general productive capacity and like your
absolutely, precisely
forge your life.
Yeah, I completely agree with you about that. I think you're absolutely right. I see it all over the place, and again, we were talking about the quality of entertainment. I think that has gone down enormously over the past 20 years. I noticed this almost every show that my wife and I like to watch was made roughly 20 years ago. The movies that we really like to watch over and over again were made that long ago. And it's not because we don't like new things. There are new things that we do like, but they're very rare and infrequent.
Have you seen Sharp?
Yes, I love Sharp. Yes.
There's a new one called SAS Rogue Heroes, which is about the origin of the SAS. It's great. It's really great. Fantastic. It's kind of like the closest you get to a new rendition of that. So if people were looking for it.
Yes, it's fantastic. My wife and I have watched that a couple of times already. It's really good, and it's not just because I'm a military history buff. It's very well done. It's very entertaining.
It's also a great example of letting people pursue their own vision outside of a bureaucratic constraint.
Oh yeah, precisely. Exactly.
And tied to also them being willing to risk their own lives, right? Just let me do it. Let me do it.
Yep.
Like, it's my life, it's now or never.
Yeah, precisely. And I also
want to live forever.
It's also a great example of the dynamic we were talking about earlier of the Celtic fringe versus the Anglo bureaucratic core, like the Cavalier culture.
Just let Celts be Celts, okay? What's it? What's it to you? And who's a
Let
Celt?
Him go mess shit up. Exactly.
A Celt. So I'm hoping he will free our people.
Yeah, and I like that very much about him. And the other half of my family is from northern Ohio, near the West Virginia border. So I have some cultural sympathy there, and I do like that about him and respect that about him a lot. And I think that we need more advocacy of that point of view and more representation of that point of view. I just I want it to come out right.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, lots still to be discovered there. I remember when I went to Hong Kong on an exchange because I read the book Taipan by James Clavell. Amazing series
Great
about
book.
the
I've read
founding
that.
of Hong
Yeah.
Kong.
Yeah, I love that one. I
Beautiful.
love Shogun too.
Yes, Shogun was great, and it's the same series as Shogun. There's a new show that's based on that book, but the Taipan Hong Kong series I thought was even better than the Japan series one, even though Shogun was more famous.
Mm-hmm.
And we went to the Philippines when I was out there, and I remember we got on this boat. And this boat it was one of those boats with like I don't know what you call them, but the balancers on either
Oh
side
yeah,
that
yeah,
glide on the
yeah.
water.
They're not quite pontoon boats, but I know what you're talking about.
It was a fast moving boat, and we were just driving, and I decided, you know what? I'm just going to climb out on this skid structure, and I climbed out on it and rode it like a banana boat, and was just like, woo! This is amazing. Just expecting to get yelled at any second, and have to come back on the boat. Because in America, on the college campus I grew up in, you weren't able, if you climbed a tree, you'd get arrested by the cops. Right. Yeah. So I'm like, okay, this is more dangerous than climbing a short 20-foot tree. So someone's going to yell at me. I looked over, I saw the Filipino driver of the boat look over at me and then just look back and keep driving. I was like, thank you. I left free.
Yeah, right. Exactly. I've heard similar things about. I've been to the Philippines also back in 2000 to Cebu, right. And I had a similar impression. And I've heard similar things from other friends that have gone elsewhere. I actually met a guy once.
Yeah.
Huh? Yeah, Cebu was.
That's where I was.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I liked it a lot, except for the air pollution. I have asthma, and that really.
Not really as bad as Beijing, so.
Yeah, well, really don't want to go there. But I even have, an on-again, off-again friend who basically permanently relocated from the United States to Thailand. And he basically says he feels freer in Thailand today than he does in America.
Well, that's the reason I went to Asia. And it's also the reason I came back. Because I realized that these countries, when you create a new industry, there is no bureaucracy to manage an industry that doesn't exist. So it takes time to form the bureaucracy. Yeah. And they don't have the cultural values to actually resist that. They just copied property rights temporarily. It exploded. And then their cultural norm will be to bureaucratically control that. Like the politics of Thailand are a mix between monarchist and green socialist Dems. Like that's the political landscape of Thailand.
Right.
It's like Curtis Yarvin versus progressive liberal, but they're all socialists, like progressive environmentalist, not liberal. Yeah. So I realized that like it took China 20 years to get to the same level of public spending as a percent of GDP and the similar levels of bureaucracy as it took the US 120 years and tons of propaganda. Like we had the cultural values to force the leftists to do a long march through the state. Like we made them try really hard and have to be really organized. Versus in China, it's going to be faster. And so that's also part of the reason why manufacturing has been leaving China for the past 10 plus years. They've filled out Southeast Asia's manufacturing capacity like 10 years ago. Right. And so that gives us some hope. They have an advantage in IP. They have an advantage in some other regulatory areas. They can move a little faster, but like our values point in the right direction and theirs point in the wrong direction. And America by far has the largest mass of people who understand this and think this way and have these cultural biases. There's no other place in the world that's even close. So even though America was like more socialist in some ways than some of these developing countries, I knew that like America was the future where the fight for the world soul would be determined. So
Yeah,
came
I
back to fight
agree.
America.
And part of what happened, I think, with the countries that recently developed in Asia and elsewhere is that they were catching up with us. We had already done the pioneering, we had already done the exploration, we had already figured out how to make stuff. All they had to do was copy us, and so they were able to do that very quickly and catch up with us. But to a great extent now they have caught up with us, and what they're not as good at is the next part of the process, which is now they have to figure out what to do next.
I just had an epiphany. The way that you described the way that some like progressives rationalized the slower growth after the 1970s so that they wouldn't have to tie it to like the obvious massive growth of the administrative state. Maybe that was connected and it happened to be around the same time. But they say this thing like, oh, okay, they maxed out. There was some natural threshold for like easy, low-hanging fruit, and they maxed it out off of like the use of energy. The modern economy is really because of energy, and then we maxed out the benefits of energy, and then blah, 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 blah. What they're describing, the half-truth, real part of that dynamic relates better to somewhere like Asia, where they copied everything there could be to be copied. And if you don't have the innovation gear, then it's easy to slip into that mentality, because that is your reality, is that you're getting diminishing returns. But that's because you're not unlocking innovation. And the reason we shifted to that diminishing return model is because we banned innovation around that time.
Yes, exactly right. Correct. And this has now led, China in particular that I know of, to try and, come up with, essentially a department of innovation.
That's hilarious.
They have government departments devoted to figuring out how can we innovate,
That's hilarious because like it's sadly poetic, because it's like the way you're trying to rectify the situation is exactly the way the situation went bad. Looking to the Central Innovation Committee.
Yeah,
is why you don't have innovation.
And this is also why they're so hell bent on sending as many of their people here to go to school to learn how we do it, and what we're doing, because they don't know.
And people underestimate that. That's why was I able to get a job in Asia at a young age? Well, because there's a dearth of middle managers. Like no one will do anything unless they're told by a superior. So you don't have like that executive function. Why do they call executives? Because executives execute. So if you want to be useful, then you execute. And for them, that like the more people you have throughout your hierarchy that are able to execute, the more like adaptable and functional you are. And this is the same with an economy, right? Like if you empower everybody down the chain to be able to execute, to be able to produce, to be able to pursue a vision, to be able to learn how to do a surgery better and actually legally do it, even if it's a different way than the AMA says to do it. Like if you empower executive ability throughout the population instead of just at the top, then you get this massive benefits. And so that's like a perfect correlation.
Yeah, absolutely. I have to think a lot of this is the legacy in Chinese culture of the old Mandarinate and the imperial exam system, where basically,
exactly,
the only way you got out of being
fall into bureaucracy.
Yeah, the only way you got out of being a dirt poor peasant for life was you memorize the Confucian classics.
Yep.
And you'd be able to recite them on demand. And I think they took this approach, and we modeled our civil service on this.
We did. I mean, that's what school is now, right? That's just signaling and memorization and learning and multiple choice, dude. Multiple choice is the absolute worst, because it's like, actually, no, not everything is figured out. Like a lot of times the multiple choice answer that you say is right is the wrong one. So I would spend I would be taking a test and I'd go and argue with my teacher. I'm like, this is the correct multiple choice answer, or this is the one that you want. This is the one that I think is correct. I'm explaining why. I understand why you think this is the right one. I understand the logic, the argument that I'm supposed to give in the class. But I'm going to select this one because I think it's right. And I shouldn't be penalized because I've demonstrated like understanding of I know which one to pick through memorization according to what you want.
Yes.
But it removes your ability to have like an understanding about the situation. So I'd pick the other one and then he'd check me wrong, but I do it anyways because I can't like check something that I don't think is right, you know?
Yeah.
And
I had a similar debate.
I like thinking.
Yeah, I had a similar debate with one of my teachers about the concept of kinetic energy, where she was trying to explain to me that if you hold a brick above the ground, at one level, and then you hold it above the ground at a higher level, there is more kinetic energy in the brick at the higher level. And I went, that doesn't make any sense at all. You're not changing the amount of energy in something by raising it above the ground.
Did you confuse potential energy with like kinetic energy?
Well, no, I meant potential energy. Yeah,
okay.
Potential energy. But I realized, arguing with her about it, she basically admitted, okay, I can't really explain this to your satisfaction, so go talk to the physics teacher. I'm just the chemistry teacher. So I did go talk to the physics teacher, and he basically said, okay, it's not really, the energy's not really in the brick. We're talking about a relationship between the brick and the ground. And I went, oh, okay, now I get it.
Yes. You're like, yeah, it's not in the brick. That makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. So, China, again, has this culture of, mass conformity and obedience. It reminds me of the Monty Python movie, the one where they're making fun of the life of Brian, that one, right? So there's a scene where they're all chasing Brian around as their messiah and saying, tell us what to do. And it says, I don't know, just be yourselves. And all in unison, they chant, we will all be ourselves. This to me seems like what China is trying to do today. They're saying,
that's funny. That's just like the progressive conformity, right? That's exactly the same. Sorry, what were you saying at the end of your sentence?
That seems to me like what China is trying to do today. They're trying to all chant, we will all be innovative,
Yes, exactly. And then they're like, I love the challenge that China has when they're trying to win the Olympics, right? And they're like, okay, we can win weightlifting, we can win this, we can like select for these genetic traits and scout towns, but we can't win these damn ball games. Like any game with a ball, we can't win. And it's because you can't replace like individual executive function with a scientific robotic system, right? Like this is why AI won't replace humans, because AI is like super China, right? They can fill out every Excel sheet, but you need the direction to maximize the utility.
Yes, precisely. Exactly. Yeah. The team sports, China has real problems with because, you have to have.
This is so ironic too, because people accuse libertarians of like not knowing how to operate on a team or work on a team sport, but it's like voluntary hierarchy, right? Like actually there's nothing contradictory about cooperation and property rights, right? In fact, you have more cooperation, and that's kind of the whole point. You have more cooperation through individual executive function rather than top-down planning, which also fits the example of like having a middle class versus having an elite and a expanded poor class.
Yes, precisely, exactly. And again, bringing this back to the military, the military gets a bad rap for, conformity and all that, but that's only really talking about the lowest ranks and the brand new recruits. Once you're actually trained and you're capable, then you get to operate a lot more independently in the U.S. military. Certainly more than in a lot of other militaries in the world.
That's the World War II joke about, right, the Germans and the Americans, and how the Americans could operate in uncertainty. And that's kind of everything, because everything in war is uncertainty. and the modern progressive ethos is to try to eliminate uncertainty from reality, eliminate risk.
Yeah,
just save, don't, just to save one life, eliminate.
Yeah.
There cannot be even one life dead, and that's how everybody dies.
Yeah, and there's always trade-offs. I mean, my grandfather told a story. He was in the U.S. Army in World War II in the European theater in the Battle of the Bulge. And at one point, he said he and his buddy, I guess, were trapped on their own, and they had captured a German prisoner. And they had been up for several days and nights in a row, and they were terrified that they were going to fall asleep, and he was going to try and escape and kill them.
Right.
So they were seriously debating between themselves whether they ought to kill him first.
Right.
And I don't know how they answered that question. I hope they didn't kill him, but you run into trade-offs like that, and you have to be able to make independent decisions, and hopefully they're
based on circumstance rather than like a blanket policy, right? Which is what bureaucracy does, right? With blanket policy, kills your ability to react on the ground.
Yeah, precisely, exactly.
And so there's this huge unseen opportunity gap for us to really like take the world by the scruff of its shirt and transform it in our image. Like we could build so much stuff, we could do so much cool stuff. And then people talk about, right, well, they want beauty, they want, well, like, okay, then legalize people to produce handmade stuff, like custom stuff that lasts, a quality product that has a 10-year. It should be like you're buying on 10-year time frame, 5-year time frame, 15-year time frame. You should have those options. You should have the options to make them, to create them, and then we could do a lot of great stuff.
The two other things that were coming to mind here just before I completely shift off the military topic is, again, the U.S. Marine Corps' motto is adapt, improvise, and overcome. Right? Not, follow the manual. And there was a great joke. I think one of the German commanders in World War II said the problem with trying to train our people to fight the Americans according to their doctrine is they don't pay any attention to their doctrine.
Right. So that's like, what are you looking at? And like, people don't understand how historically rare this is. To give. Well,
that's the other thing. I remember hearing about some Soviet officer that was observing the U.S. Marine Corps on exercises or something, and he just couldn't believe that we had a force like that. They're just like, we couldn't possibly do this. It's a huge advantage for us to be able to have that kind of, not just that specific, branch of the military, but to have that kind of capacity, that kind of,
And why did they say that they couldn't do it? Right, because technically they could do it. It's just they couldn't let go. It's more like why can't the raccoon let go of the shiny object? Well, actually, you can. It's just you are too uncomfortable operating in uncertainty.
Yeah, it's a matter of trust and control. We're talking about, the Soviet army had to have blocking forces behind their infantry to shoot them if they retreated. Right, they couldn't trust their frontline troops not to shoot them.
Right, they had to have like even better trench barricades behind it.
I mean, David Friedman makes this point about the British Army uniforms in the American Revolutionary War, saying, why did they wear these bright red coats out in the middle of the woods? Why weren't they wearing camouflage? They could have. And the point he makes is that, their officers needed to be able to keep track of them and see them to make sure they were following orders.
Wow. And then that's a huge trade-off that you have to take. It's funny that the Soviet command structure is basically like those memes where there's the astronaut with the gun pointing at the world, and then there's another astronaut behind him with a gun, and then another astronaut behind him with a gun. Like that's how you prevent people
precisely.
from
and I've even heard it said that this is one of the reasons why China has had a hard time coming up with a nuclear missile submarine program, which is that they can't trust the people that they would have to command those subs not to launch
for fun
at the wrong targets, shall we say.
Back at Beijing, right? Like the Hunger Games or something.
Yeah, and I remember even in the Tiananmen Square massacre, when they brought in the PLA to shoot the protesters, they had to bring in multiple units before they could find one that would do it.
Really? Interesting. Yep. They should have brought in a Soviet.
Well, that's essentially what Iran is doing now. They're bringing in Hezbollah, they're bringing in Arab mercs from Iraq, and there are other proxy groups in order to, when they massacred 40,000 or more protesters at the start of the war, they
that's how they did it.
Yeah,
a lot of those were, I mean, not mean, but smart. Like that's same thing that happened in Venezuela, right? Like the guys protecting Maduro were Cubans. We killed almost all Cubans. Those Cubans.
Yep.
And it's like African regimes, right? They'll have Russian mercenaries. And there's a lot of times where that's a good thing, right? Where there's just like, there's one part of the Congo that is actually, they want property rights. They want to grow. They're more successful relatively. But
I know it's a really small part, right? Yeah.
And they can't pay for security because even though they would be a more profitable investment, Russia is geopolitically invested in the larger territories, and it's illegal for U.S. people to be like mercenaries, so they're not allowed to hire us, and so there's no one for them to hire really. But if they could, then that would be great for them.
Well, and there actually was a free market PMC ecosystem in Africa in the 90s, executive outcomes and a few others. It started in Angola because when Angola's government switched allegiance from the Soviet side to the West, the MPLA, they allowed a bunch of foreign corporations to operate in Angola, but they required them to all provide for and pay for their own security. And so a bunch of former South African Defense Force veterans who had fought there on the other side joined up, and Executive Outcomes was essentially in the business of securing the natural resource extraction operations there and getting paid with a cut of the royalties. And they ended up getting
really awesome.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Is colonialism without the subsidized? You know how everybody complains like, oh, well, the military is doing this for the oil companies or whoever else. Why don't they do it themselves? It was them doing it themselves. And then you just do the right amount, right? You do as much as is needed to improve the situation or whether something's possible. You don't sink costs into regime change and democracy building and cultural transformation.
Yeah, when in fact they were much more effective in establishing and stabilizing democracy than the government forces. So in Sierra Leone, there was a civil war. The established government brought in Executive Outcomes. Executive Outcomes got the contract from the UN, but they were replacing UN peacekeepers that couldn't do it. And they did it at much lower cost and very quickly. They defeated the rebels, and didn't wipe them out entirely, but, beat them back so they were insignificant. They held new elections. They elected a new government. The UN said, okay, thanks, Executive Outcomes. You're done. You can go now. We'll take over. And then the rebels made a big comeback. And they ended up they wouldn't let Executive Outcomes come back in because they're evil, for-profit mercenaries. And they sent in, I think it was a group out of Nigeria, a peacekeeping group. And, the Brits had to end up sending in their forces, Royal Marines, etc. It's a big mess. If they had just left Executive Outcomes in place, none of that would have happened.
Yeah, because when nation gets involved too, it creates all these extra political issues, and then they either do too much or too little, or the incentives aren't lined up correctly.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, precisely. Yep. Yeah, so
Yeah, what were you saying?
I'm not sure.
I was just going to say we should probably wrap up pretty soon because we're getting around 2 hours. Do you have any topics and any elements or missed thoughts that you wanted to elaborate on?
Well, I don't know. Do you want to cover any more about the Iran war? Because I do have a few thoughts on that.
Sure, let's do the Iran war real fast. Go ahead.
So basically, I think that as far as I can tell, where things stand now, it looks like I think we're trying to play good cop, bad cop with Iran,
Mm-hmm.
and we're letting Vance take the lead as the good cop, and I'm actually
Mm-hmm.
kind of fine with that because the big complaint everyone's having is we're offering Iran too good a deal, and I
Mm-hmm.
think that's true, but I don't think Iran's going to take it, and so I think basically it's a PR exercise for us to offer them the best possible deal we can so that they look bad when they refuse.
So that fits the pattern of the 12-day war onto the bombing, onto the period of negotiation and the recent war, onto the next bombing, right? It's like the space that we give them gives us the credibility that we aren't like the aggressive actor, or they've left us no choice, or
Yes.
or whatever it is, right? It's like we're showing them we gave them a chance for peace.
Yeah.
On the but I don't quite expect that dynamic to apply to this time. Possibly because we might, end up having to bomb them again. But I think it's like when you shake something and it gets lower and lower. I think they're towards the bottom of the shake of their leverage. They're kind of narrowed into a smaller and smaller corner, and it's kind of comedic right now, right? How countries don't even want to accept Iranian oil because they found alternatives in the supply chain, and so they're struggling to even like they lost their customers. So like
Yeah.
Iran was really really beaten. Like we played our cards well to really hurt them without getting ourselves too drawn in. Like it's a mess for them. It's a disaster.
It is certainly in
And
the long
I
term.
think there will be a lot of wiggling and jiggling, like kind of after the Gaza deal, right? And like, how do you deal
Yes.
with Hamas people who don't want to give up? And what's the like? And then there's some drama about the fighting starting again, but ultimately that was kind of like the beginning of the end for them getting squeezed out. I think we're going to see something similar in Iran. But do you have a counter to that?
Yeah, no, I would mostly agree. I think that there's been a big sudden upsurge of interest in alternative pipeline routes out of
Yes.
the Persian Gulf region on the Arab side. So that's going to come online, probably fairly quickly, but not instantaneously.
Mm-hmm.
They're very highly motivated to build it fast, and they have the money,
Yeah.
so I think they'll do it. But just construction takes time. Uh, and plus, I think it was a bit of a sort of a proof of concept to the world that if we let Iran blockade the Straits of Hormuz, then the Asia Pacific region is going to run out of oil fast. I think
Right.
Australia was down to like 45 days worth of reserves, which had to have been pretty
Right.
scary for them.
Which incentivizes Asia to abandon their attack dog, right? Like
Yep.
you set up a foil, like this is a classic. Like you set up a foil, they act crazy, and then eventually the villain throws them under the bus, right? Throws their self-destructive minion under the bus, right? Then you've done everything. I've extracted what I could from you. Now I'm abandoning this
Yeah.
investment in Iran. Like China's not fighting to the end on Iran. So
Yeah, it's ultimately not worth it to them. Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
Yeah, so I think that we're going to see things. I think we're on a reasonably good path here, and I think I'm still pretty optimistic that it's going to turn out well overall.
Yeah. And then it'll be interesting when we finally get those Middle East pipelines into Europe, right? Which I think I like Iraq or Syria. You need one of those countries to be stable enough to put a pipeline through.
Yep.
And then you can connect, Qatar and Saudi Arabia to Europe via pipeline, and that changes the whole situation with Russia, because a lot of people don't know is Europe has no external continental pipelines except through Russia, which they're not using now, or it got blown up. I don't know if are there still any pipeline exports going back and forth between Europe and Russia? There were at the beginning of the war.
There's some, I don't know how much.
Even if there are, right, that's part of that negotiation. That's part of the leverage Russia has.
Yes.
So like Europe, the reason gas is so expensive, besides their environmental regulations and the fact that they can't drill their own oil, which they have, and they also don't have external pipelines, so they have to get it liquefied natural gas on container ships, which is like 4 times as expensive.
Yes.
And they could just be piping that straight in from the Middle East, which is why Qatar was awarded the 2010 World Cup. It's amazing how much of a tool of geopolitics the World Cup is. Like FIFA is so politically astute and tied in. It's very funny.
Yeah, it is.
I like it actually, because it seems corrupt, but it's like, you know, this is what great world tournaments are for. They're for diplomacy, not just the sports. Like,
it certainly is an inherent aspect of them, I think. Yeah. And I know that, you know, way back when the Brits, before they developed the North Sea, they got a lot of their oil from the Middle East, from Iran. And then they had,
they dug up Ephesus in the 1800s.
And they had Iraq too. And I think there was a pipeline going from Iraq to Haifa back then.
Crazy.
So theoretically that could happen again if only, Iraq and Israel could get along well enough.
Yep, which is the direction we're trending, right? Because now it's not as much about fighting Israel. It's about like taking the opportunity to be first in the Middle East. Like all these Muslim countries are now racing for development, and they can see the vision of Saudi Arabia is actually possible, right? So I want that for myself.
And if we can get Iraq from out from under the thumb of Iran, there are pro-American, pro-Western candidates in Iraq that could take the lead if we could.
And it's also just like the expectation, right? Like, what's the future expectation? Because you can have the same people, but they like trend in a different way depending on how you think the region's going to go. And if the U.S. is taking a more withdrawn presence, then it kind of changes. You create the room for a Vietnam type evolution, right?
Exactly. That is a very good example, and that's oddly enough, like 2 of the other countries in Asia where I've had Westerners tell me they felt very free were actually Cambodia and Vietnam.
Right.
Even though they're still ruled by totalitarian, communist party regimes, but the actual experience of them on the ground is, they felt a lot freer.
Yeah, the classic trade-offs. Oh, and then I had one more interesting thought about what was the thing we were saying just right before that? Not even a second ago.
The leaders tilting in one direction or another, depending on.
Oh yeah. So the middle. This is an interesting angle that I haven't heard really anyone speculate about. But think about it from this perspective, right? Like the Middle East. Okay, they know that like America is not going to try and conquer them and turn them into a democracy anymore, or there's not an existential threat in that way. They also know they have these huge diasporas in Europe, right?
Yes.
So from a Muslim perspective, what are they going to? They're going to want to not rock the boat. They're going to want to like keep their foreign diaspora in good standing. So they're going to want to have good relations with these European countries so that they don't murder and deport all of their countrymen who are seeking to like take over Europe, a la not the Reconquista, what happened before the
demographic conquest.
Right. So Arab conquests. Which is like as good from the perspective of the Middle East going in a more peaceful direction, but it's bad from the perspective of the West getting demographically replaced. But like we can
again, if it's compatible immigration, then I don't have a problem with it. And one of my favorite examples of exactly the dynamic you're talking about is the difference between Somalia and Somaliland. Right. So Somalia, and unfortunately, a lot of their, diaspora community has a very bad reputation. And unfortunately, I think there's some good reasons for that. But Somaliland is amazing. And you never hear people complaining about the diaspora from Somaliland itself. And Somaliland, they just got recognized by Israel. It's like the only Muslim country in the world that I can think of where everybody walks around wearing an Israeli flag, and they're all happy about it, you know.
Right, and they're like the anti-communists, right, who are actually winning against, and then the refugees in Michigan are actually the communists. And yeah, I think people really drastically undersell the people's potential to adopt property rights and Western values, even through their own cultural and interpretive framework. I traveled all over the world. You know, I talked to a Muslim guy in Indonesia for weeks about like libertarian ethical philosophy and individual rights and like American Constitution and stuff, and he understood it. So like that's greatly underestimated. At the same time, Celts still have different voting patterns than Saxons, right?
Yep.
And they've been fighting for literally thousands of years.
Yep.
So there are serious like impacts that fundamentally like change the nature of the country if you change the people. Even if you equaled out the ideology, there's going to be like slightly different interpretations, and then it's going to be like a basis for factionalism. So I'm much more in favor of like the values spreading among nations rather than like uniting. Like, so you spread the values, right? You take the biblical corollary to this,
right?
Which is that Christ said that like Christianity will spread through the nations before they come together, not the nations come together and then, and so people get the order wrong.
Yeah.
And also come together.
I agree with you about that. Yes. That
I'm not saying that we should mix the whole world together and like, but like come together. I don't know exactly what would happen after, if assuming Christian Western values spread throughout the whole world, which if the U.S. goes free has a great chance because they're forced to change through hermetic competitive process, right?
Yeah, and that's it. Also, again, ties into I think a great aspect of the contrast between Somalia and Somaliland, which is because Somaliland had no international recognition, they didn't get any foreign aid.
Oh, fascinating, and which is an advantage, right?
So they had to figure out how to make money and survive on their own without it.
Well, this is just like the subsidized railroad companies, right? Where the U.S. had, I think, more miles of rail than Europe up until World War II. I mean, in the late 1800s, we were just producing ridiculous amounts of rail. And then the subsidized companies killed it because the industry became unprofitable almost as soon as it was subsidized. And then it's like, what's the point of trains if it's always running at a loss that the government has to cover? But it didn't, like, trains don't have to run at a loss. And then they built the interstate highway and that killed the rest of it. But that's a great irony that like socialists love trains, hate cars, and build roads. And libertarians love trains, hate roads, and build cars.
Yes. That is a good way to put it. Yes, I agree. Yeah, there are these weird contradictions there. But yeah, I think that ties together a lot of what we've been trying to say here, that, you know, to the extent that we can let people rely on, you know, the free market to figure things out and be productive, that's great. But there are occasions where, you know, it does need a bit of a boost. The problem is to try and keep that boost, you know, to an absolute minimum as much as possible. And there's always going to be drawbacks to that.
Right. And sure, creative solutions to unwind existing dependencies while trying to avoid the pitfalls of creating new future dependencies is like the tricky balancing act. So, well, this was an absolutely fantastic conversation, Tim.
Thank you very much.
I'm glad we got together, and let's stay in touch. And you can follow Tim Starr on social media, Substack. Give us your shout outs.
Yeah, so Substack, my Substack is called Free Markets and Firepower. Hopefully that's pretty easy to find. And I am pretty active on X. My handle is Tim Starr 01, I believe. I can never remember. It's either 01 or 2001. It varies.
Well, let's look it up right now. Yes. Oh, it's 2001. Tim Starr 2001.
Good. Okay, that's the one.
9/11.
Yeah, that's the year I created that. Not that account, but that handle for myself. So that's why. Yeah, and so yeah, if anybody wants to get in touch, feel free. Follow what I say. Agree with some of it if you possibly can, and let me know what you think. It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Pleasure, Tim. Have a good one, everyone. Peace.
Yes, bye-bye.